We all know different photographers have different editing styles. There's the natural look, the vibrant Instagram style, then we have the more manipulated photos with sky replacements and many more. I always wondered how my images would look like if they would be edited by other people with different styles. And that is how I got the idea. Why don't I just send the same raw image to all my favorite photographers out there and ask them to edit it? So I got in contact with a lot of other photographers and just got a bunch of folks to participate. Antonio Valente, Daniel Laan, Enrico Fossati, Gavin Hardcastle, Nick Page, Stefan Forster and Tristan Todd. All of them submitted great work which I can't wait to share. But first, let's take a look at the raw image I sent out. I chose this image since there are many different directions where it could go. There is a hard edge between landscape and sky, so there's the possibility for an easy sky replacement. We do have some subtle golden light, so it could either be a warm golden hour shot or a more natural daytime shot depending on the white balance. In fact, editing a daytime shot like this makes the whole process more interesting because those images are just way harder to edit in my opinion. Now at this point I would suggest you grab the raw file from the description of the video, give it a try yourself and then come back to check out the different edited versions so you won't be influenced by the images shown in the upcoming minutes. Finally, let's start with the pictures. You can check the chapters of the video to quickly navigate to different versions. Antonio Valente is a fellow landscape photographer and gifted when it comes to editing. Looking over his Instagram page, you will recognize his wide range of different editing styles, from vibrant and contrast-rich to dark, gloomy mountain landscapes. Antonio has created a strong golden hour look with high contrast, and although the original raw file had slightly out of focus mountains in the back, Antonio managed to nicely sharpen everything. Especially the reflection in the water looks great with all that detail. What I really love about this version, besides the golden warm colors, is the darkened sky towards the left side. This is something I include most of the times in my editing process as well. Daniel Laan is famous for his incredible glowing mushroom photography. In fact, it was his work that inspired me to try shooting glowing mushrooms myself many years back. Not only are his mushroom images out of this world good, his other landscape work is outstanding as well. Daniel has cropped the photo to center the reflection in the foreground. Overall, he went for a lower contrast and a soft effect on top of it, which creates a super dreamy look, which works great on this scene. Overall, the colors are again more on the warmer side, however there is slightly less saturation involved. With Enrico Fossati, we have another insanely talented photo editor participating. His photos have a very unique, dreamy style to them. I'm a huge fan, especially of his forest related work, and I'm glad he found the time to take part in this video. Here we have the first version with heavier photo manipulation. Enrico created a dark scene with artificial fog and replaced the sky with heavier, more gloomy clouds without losing the highlights on the left side. Again, there is a softness visible which applies a subtle dreamy look with desaturated colors. I know those kind of image manipulation is not for everyone, but I got to say this is certainly in the top 3 for me. I love this version. Gavin Hardcastle, aka Photo Ripper, was probably one of the first photographers on YouTube I followed. So I'm very honored he found the time to take part. Not only will you learn things watching his videos and see amazing images, he's all around a very likable person with lots of humor. Gavin's version made me giggle every time I opened it. That's because I really wasn't expecting a whale making an appearance in any of the images. Nonetheless, I appreciate the time Gavin put into this composite. He even wrote us a few words to explain his artistic reasoning. The first thing I noticed about your image, Christian, is that the mountain was not in focus. Instead, you went for a more artistic approach to many other landscape photographers and focused on some blades of grass in the foreground. I was so inspired by your out-of-the-box thinking that I decided to simply take this image to its logical conclusion and insert a whale kindly sent to me by Simon d'Entremont. Between Simon's amazing wildlife photography, your unconventional technique, and my editorial creativity, I think we made something very special. Let the awards pile up. Thank you, Gavin, for recognizing my intention shifting the focus on the foreground. That was totally planned. Nick Page is another YouTube photographer I've been following for a long time. Not only does he have on-location videos, but he's also showing a lot of insanely helpful editing tips and tricks on his channel. I highly recommend watching his videos. Nick was the first one to send me his version, for which I was very excited. Here we have a strong dreamy style, and again overall the picture has more of a golden hour look to it. Nick made the whole scene noticeably darker while keeping the brightness of the highlights on the mountains in the back, and thus creating a very pleasing contrast. Plus, it seems he intentionally darkened the foreground to get the focus more on the mountains in the distance. I'm sure you have seen some of Stefan Forster's drone videos already. He is the best drone landscape photographer out there by far, and I highly recommend visiting one of his live presentations if you have the chance. His drone work is mind-blowingly good, and what makes it even more impressive is the fact he doesn't go crazy on the editing. In fact, I was really hoping to get him participate since I love his natural editing style. And just as I was hoping for, Stefan was going for the more natural approach, with a well-exposed scene, vibrant but not too saturated colors and lots of details. This leads us to a very different image from all the other entries, since his version is the closest to what the human eye would have seen. As far as I can tell, Stefan was also the only participant to create an HDR version out of the provided RAW files, which makes sense as it is a lot easier to get a natural exposure this way. If you're as much into mountain photography as I am, you have come across Tristan Todd. He has a more natural editing style to his images, but will also include heavier editing elements from time to time. His photography skills as well as editing skills are top notch, and you will fall in love with his images once you browse through his Instagram page. With Tristan's edit, we are looking at another different approach. The biggest difference here being the chosen white balance, as the whole image is a lot colder than the other entries. Again, the whole photo got quite a bit darker to make it look more dramatic, plus he also seems to have dropped the saturation of green and yellow tones quite a bit, resulting in more apparent blue tones. His version definitely helped me getting more open for colder landscape scenes, as I would have never thought about a cold style on this particular shot. Now that we went through all the entries, I of course also want to share my version. And I ended up with something like this. I wanted to have a very saturated blue sky while keeping the saturation rather low in the foreground with the yellow and the green tones. I have edited my version before seeing any other images from the other photographers to not be influenced, but you can see I had a very similar approach to a lot of the other images by making the shot a little darker, adding some more contrast while keeping the highlights. I also tried to apply a very subtle dreamy look and applied a bit of cropping. And of course, at this point I also want to show you the whole editing process for my version. As always, we are starting with the raw adjustments, and I'm here in the camera raw editor. You can see I'm not going to create an HDR image out of the different exposures. I think this one is pretty good as a base exposure. First off, let me just say I have cropped the image very slightly, just taking a part away from all the sides. The next step is to simply go to the profiles and change it to Adobe Landscape, which will bring up the saturation and also help brightening up the darks in the foreground. Next up, let's open up the basic panel and adjust the white balance. I do think I want to make it warmer, so I'm going to bring up the temperature. And with this, I'm just aiming for more of a golden hour look, which should work pretty good on this scene. Also, I do want to bring down the tint very slightly, just like that. Now, looking at the histogram, it doesn't seem like we have any over or underexposure. Still, you can see we pretty much don't have any details in the mountain face in the back. So what I want to do first is to just bring down the exposure and thus just revealing details in that area. This is looking pretty good. Of course, due to the dropped exposure, there is now some underexposure going on, but I don't think that matters too much. Next, I also want to bring down the highlights, which will further reveal details in the mountain, just like that. And now at this point, I could add some contrast by bringing down the shadows. I do want this shot to be rather dark. Just trying to make it a little more dramatic by making it this dark. And then let's just slightly raise the whites. I don't want to risk any overexposure, so I'm paying close attention to the histogram, but this is looking really good. And finally, I do want to bring up the blacks. Perfect. Looking much better already. Then let's bring up the vibrance and maybe add a little bit of texture. Alright, so that's the image after the base adjustments. You can see we have fixed the exposure, added some stronger color tones, as well as giving it more of a golden hour look. Next up, let's apply some masking. I'm starting with a radial gradient and I'm just going to drop it over that reflection of the mountains in the foreground because I want to make this area a little brighter, so I'm bringing up the exposure. And I'm also bringing up the texture and the clarity, just to make it more visible. Then I do think I need to apply a linear gradient over that foreground. And in here, let's further bring up the whites, just introducing some more brightness to the dark area down there. And again, adding some texture to give this reflection some nice sharpness. Perfect. Then let's work on the sky. My intention is to make the blue part darker. For that reason, let me grab a color range mask, and with that mask I'm clicking somewhere in the blue part of the sky. And let's click in here once more by holding down the shift key, so we get a wider range of blue tones selected. Of course, now we also have selected parts of the foreground which we don't want, so I'm going to hit subtract. I'm choosing a linear gradient and I'm just going to create one like this. Also taking away parts of the left part of the sky, since this is already super dark. This looks like a good mask. Let's just try and bring down the exposure. Perfect. And finally, let's add another linear gradient for the top part. Here I do want to bring up the clarity a notch and maybe even add a little bit of dehaze. Alright, and that's it for those masking adjustments. You can see we have added some more contrast, especially in the sky, and made the reflection a little bit clearer. So next up, let's do a bit of color grading. Starting in the color mixer, in the hue, I'm going to bring down the green hue. I'm also bringing down the yellow hue slightly, and I'm raising the orange hue. By doing this, I'm just trying to bring all those color tones in the foreground more in line with each other. And now I'm switching over to the saturation tab, where I'm going to raise the orange saturation, and I'm dropping the yellow tones as well as the blue tones. Okay, nice. Then let's head over to the luminance tab. Here I'm bringing up the orange luminance just to add a little more brightness to those highlights in here. I'm also going to increase the green luminance and I'm dropping the blue luminance a bit. Perfect. Then I'm heading into the color grading tab and I'm just working on the highlights and the midtones. So for the highlights, let's go with a warm hue, since I want to have this golden hour look, and I'm going to bring up the saturation a bit. So I'm going to use a rather low amount of saturation this time because I don't want to overdo it, but this should be enough. Then for the midtones, I'm going to apply a cold color tone, and let's raise the saturation quite a bit more. And this balances out those warmer highlights from before, so this looks pretty good. Finally, I'm heading into the calibration tab, and I'm just bringing down the blue primary hue slightly while raising the saturation. Alright, and I think that's it for the raw adjustments. Actually, wait, we can still sharpen this image in the details tab, so let's do this real quick. Alright, so let's open up this shot into Photoshop. First I need to clean up this image because there are some tiny grass blades coming in from the bottom part. Here I'm just using the spot healing brush, getting rid of them. But so far I think it looks pretty clean, and I'm almost done actually. There's just one more thing I want to apply, and that's the dreamy look. For that reason I'm going to use the Nik Collection plugin, so let's head into Filter, Nik Collection, Color Effects Pro 4. Alright, and on the right side you can already see I have added a few filters already. Mainly the polarization effect, the pro contrast effect, and the classical soft focus filter. So let me go through this one by one. Activating the polarization effect, you can see the sky is getting a little darker, while also there's some more overall saturation added to the image. Then I'm using the pro contrast filter to just add some more contrast. You can see how this especially makes the reflection in the foreground more interesting and just adds some more punch to the image. And finally, for the dreamy look, I like to use the classical soft focus effect, but I dialed down the settings quite a bit, just to keep the dreamy effect very, very subtle. And with those filters applied, let's hit OK. And here we have the finished image. So I hope this whole video idea was interesting for you guys to watch. I hope you had a lot of fun with it. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask in the comments, and thank you very, very much for watching this video.